Augusta Schultz Schmeckel and her two children, Fred and Bertha, and Augusta's mother, arrived in Milwaukee from Germany in 1871. Augusta worked in a lumber camp between Racine and Kenosha, where she met and married Ferdinand Mittag. In 1874, they moved to and settled north of Brookside on the farm known to many as the Ponco Farm. Their son Fred, from Augusta's first marriage, played with the Indian children who lived along the creek across the road. One spring the Indians left, as they often did, but did not return in a week as expected. No one ever knew what happened. Shown here are Ferdinand and Augusta with Fred and Bertha, and Annie, who was born to the two of them. In 1891, Fred bought the land just north of his parents' farm from Eldred at Stiles. At that time there was an Indian by the name of Patchnose living on the land. Fred told him to stay on the land as he was not yet ready to begin building. Fred worked as a cook in the lumber camps. When he returned to his land one spring, he found that Patchnose was gone. No one knows what happened to him. Died, moved, or buried on the land. In 1897, Fred married Wilhelmina Bohl from Abrams and moved into a log cabin on his land. The Cook brothers owed Fred some back pay from the lumber camps. They offered him as many loads of lumber as he wanted at $1 a load. He got enough loads to build the house, barn, and machine shed. Fred said there were 50 loads. The house was only the main section and upstairs. The kitchen wing was added later. The summer kitchen became the hayloader building. The log house became the chicken coop and pig pen. Fred and Wilhelmina had 3 children, Elsie, who died at the age of 3 of scarlet fever, Alvin, and Edna. The day after Christmas in 1906, Wilhelmina died of breast cancer. For a few years, Fred had a housekeeper, but eventually remarried to Lena Mead. In 1916, Lena died in childbirth. Alvin grew up on the farm and met Laura Noel when she was teaching at the Greenwood School during the 1920-1921 school year. They were married in June of 1922. They stayed on the farm for a few months, but then moved to Oconto. Alvin worked at the Holt sawmill. During this time, they had their only child, Lila. After a couple of years in town, Alva and Laura returned to the farm. In the spring of 1929, Alvin and Laura then returned to Oconto to live. Alvin went back to work at Holt's sawmill. Alvin's sister Edna and her husband Art Risto moved to the farm to work with Fred. During the Depression, Alvin worked in Oconto at any job he could find. In 1934, he ran a gas station for Frank Lingelbach on the highway. In the spring of 1941, Alvin moved to Peshtigo, where he ran a garage and filling station. This photo from 1942 is of Alvin, Laura, and their only child, Lila. In time, Alvin's sister's husband, Art Risto, passed away. Edna then married Art's brother, Pete, and moved off the Mittag farm. The farm was now left with only Fred to work it. After some long consideration, Fred went to Peshtigo and convinced Alvin and Laura to return to the farm. This began a period of over 2 decades of Alvin and Laura being very active participants in the Collettville community. Also during this period, their only grandson, Bill Tippett, Lila's son, came to help on the farm in the summer.
My mom and dad kicked me out of the house every summer to come work on the farm because my dad said, "Boy, it's good for you to work on the farm." And he was 100% right. He gave me good working ethics. Job had to get done, you didn't think about it, you just did it. And I learned a lot about machinery, I learned a lot about animals. It was a learning, it was a great learning experience. I became a man. Yeah, you got muscles and you learn how to work. I'm Bill Tippett. I was born in Flint, Michigan, but I grew up most of the time, every summer on the farm over here on Jay. My grandma and grandpa, Laura and Alvin Mittag, and every summer I'd come down here and work on the farm. And I worked on the farm from time I was 8 years old to the time I was 14 years old. I worked on that farm and other farms around, picked pickles with the Mexicans out in the field, just anything to get money, and just had a good time. Alvin and Laura were never rich, but they were always busy, and Grandpa had always had a big garden, huge garden. Grandma never threw anything away. I can still remember my grandma having a bowl of chewed up chewing gum, and she would actually use that to press in something to stop a leak. And I can still remember the kitchen floor was linoleum, and she actually painted the linoleum because the linoleum was so bad. She painted it, and it really looked good. Yeah, farming. I remember taking care of the cows. That's a fond memory, you know, taking care of the cows. And I can still remember the few times I helped milk, and a few times the electricity went off, and I learned to milk by hand. Clean the barn, you know, and fed the chickens. They always had chickens. Chickens were not penned up. These are true free-ranging chickens. These chickens were in the backyard, in the back porch, and you know what they do with chickens, they go. If you lived on a farm and you worked on a farm as a young boy, you learn how to drive. You learn how to drive stick shift truck, and you learn how to drive tractor. My grandpa had a cockshut tractor and John Deere tractor. He had two tractors. I learned to drive the great big one. I met this one guy, Boots McTravers. He said he had a pickle patch. I said, I can pick pickles. He says, no, he says, you're pretty young. I said, I can pick pickles. He said, well, I'll watch you. I'll see how you do. Because they wanted to pick clean every time. So I went out there and he watched me pick, you know, and the day was over, and he went over the pickle patch, and he watched me pick. And he said, well, you did a pretty good job. And you gotta understand, this is a young kid, and the Mexicans were getting half. Whatever they picked, they got half. I actually got half. He gave me half too, which is big money. I can still remember my great-grandpa, Fred, and he used to always whittle, always whittle, always whittle. And I can remember every Friday, we'd all go to town and go grocery shopping. Grandma, Grandpa, Friday, go grocery shopping. After grocery shopping, stop at the snack shack and have a hamburger and a malt. So one time we came back home, and they had a dog named Nero, a German Shepherd, mixed. And Nero came up and bit, put his mouth around my wrist and tried to pull me somewhere, just like Lassie. And sure enough, they pulled us over to the corn crib, and there was Fred, my great-grandpa, laying there. And he'd gone to whittle, and he fought to find a piece of wood, and he had fallen and he couldn't get up. So he sent Nero to get Billy, and Billy came and got him. Fred was a hard worker, but he believed in the old ways, the farm in the old ways, farm the old ways. My grandpa says, no, no, no. Dad, he says, let's get a tractor. Get rid of the horses. We can do so much better. So as it was told to me by my sister, they were all the time fighting. So Grandpa left the farm, and he came into town. He worked at other jobs, whether it was logging. He did a lot of logging, and he did all kinds of other jobs. So finally, Fred needed help, and he says, okay, we'll get a tractor. So that's why Grandma and Grandpa went back on the farm. Across the street was the Belange's farm, and I'd go across the street to play kick the can or whatever it was at nighttime with Gary and them. And Gary was the oldest, and then Judy was the second. And then it went on down 12 kids. And so I just met her, and I fell in love with her. And the way it happened is I came down April 18th, 1966 was our first date. I came down from General Motors, and I wanted to go bowling, and then nobody to go bowling with. So she came over to slap the pigs at that time, and I asked her if her mom and dad let her date yet. And they said, well, she said, well, yeah, they do, but they didn't. But I was a friend of the family, so we went to Golden Bowl, to bowling. And the next weekend I had to go back to work. So I said to Judy, I said, "You want to go bowling again?" She said, "Yeah." So we went bowling again, and we got out of bowling, and I had a 62 Bonneville convertible, and somebody had put threw rotten eggs inside the car. And the next day I got up, and she was in my car, cleaning my car with the rotten eggs, from the rotten eggs. And I told her I was going to marry her. And I married her. And that's
That's a good story.
Kind of a good story. Coolidgeville had a really, really active 4-H group. So even though I wasn't from around here, a lot of them knew me. So I actually got involved in the fair when it was fair time, and Richard didn't want to take the cows to the fair. Judy had a grand champion cow, and all the rest of the kids had cows and chickens. Because I was around, Richard didn't have to take the cows not to the fair. He gave me the keys to the truck, and I hauled the cows to the fair. You know, a young kid. So I saw the fair and the kids and the farm animals, and working on the farm and haying, and it's just the whole complex, the whole thing was just a great thing to do. It was something for a young kid to do and grow and as a man. So
Fred died in 1958 at almost 90 years old. A year or so later, Alvin and Laura sold the cattle and most of the land. They kept the house and the surrounding 5 acres. Alvin worked at the feed mill in Brookside and the Oddfellows home in Green Bay. Laura lost a leg due to the complications of diabetes. Alvin was almost 80 when he died of pneumonia and exhaustion. At that time, the farm was sold and Laura went to the Oddfellows nursing home in Green Bay. Laura passed away in 1987. While the Mittag family has left the Coolidgeville community, the buildings built by Fred stand today, weather-worn and showing their age, yet they are reminders of the strength, courage, optimism, and hard work of those who built them and then labored on the farm to support their family and community.